Hey, Brian Miller here, author, speaker, coach, and consultant on human connection. And thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Thursday Thoughts. Oh, this brings me back. So I groggily rolled out of bed in my tiny apartment and stumbled through the living room / dining room / kitchen. Just months earlier, I had taken a big risk on myself and moved out of an apartment I had with roommates to get my own place for the very first time. At 23 years old, I had never paid so much rent in my life, and I wasn't convinced I'd actually be able to keep that place on my meager salary as a struggling self-employed magician. I mean, I couldn't afford the gas to go on a date. I needed that money for gas to get to gigs. My go-to food was rice with melted cheese on top. Like if there was a new CD that I wanted, it didn't matter. I couldn't afford it. And when my friends, mostly much older than me, invited me out to dinner or karaoke nights, I only ever ordered water, just desperately hoping no one would notice. The apartment I was living in was so minimal that I didn't even need my glasses. Now, I'm very nearsighted, so after 3 to 4 feet, everything gets very blurry, but most of the time in that place, I just left them off because it was small enough I could perfectly find my way around. All right, so back to that one morning, I rolled out of bed, I kind of stumbled out of the bedroom, and across the living room, I saw my beautiful guitar hanging on the wall. This was my prized possession, certainly the nicest and most expensive thing I owned. A cedar top Ovation acoustic electric guitar I had purchased just a few years earlier after driving a hard negotiation with the seller out of necessity. In those early lonely days building my career, I often found comfort in that guitar, sitting and playing and singing quietly to myself, trying not to disturb the neighbors to my left and right through the paper-thin walls. This guitar was my happy place, and I began most mornings by admiring it from afar before starting the coffee. But on this particular morning, I noticed something was different within the blurry shape. Squinting as I moved closer to it, the guitar finally came into focus, and I realized what was wrong. My body flooded with panic. The bridge had snapped completely off of the body and was now dangling by the strings. After the initial shock wore off, I searched on Google for, the Ovation customer service number and called them up, only to discover that their international headquarters was right here in Connecticut, only an hour from where I was living at the time. I called them up, talked to a customer service rep who said, hey, if I wanted to bring the guitar down to them in person, they'd be glad to take a look at it. So an hour later, I rolled up at their door, just desperate. The guys at Ovation were super nice. It was just a couple of dudes in a warehouse that make every Ovation guitar all over the world. It was pretty spectacular. They gave me a tour, which I enjoyed, but my anxiety was just amping up. And I finally just said, can you please take a look at this? He opened the case and shook his head. Unfortunately, this wasn't a clean break. As you can see, the bridge took a whole bunch of the cedar top with it. We're going to have to replace the whole top. I'm like, okay. Said, well, it's going to be 8 to 10 weeks and cost $200 to $300. I was like, what? I didn't have $200 to $300, and I definitely didn't want to be without my guitar for 8 to 10 weeks. He goes, listen, this thing's out of warranty. It's out of its 2-year warranty, but it's still within the 10-year limited warranty. So we can fix it for just a couple $100, but we're pretty backed up right now. There was no way I could afford that at the time. I mean, I was eating rice and cheese for my main meals as it was. So I worked in my newfound negotiation skills. I was like, listen, I know it's out of its 2-year warranty, but are you telling me Ovation's quality policy is that after just a couple of years, your guitars snap in half? He was like, well, obviously no. And I said, great, then you'll stand behind it and fix it. He just stared me down. He was like, all right, kid, we'll fix it. But it's going to be 8 to 10 weeks. We're pretty backed up right now. Fine with me. I mean, it wasn't fine with me. I really didn't want to be without my guitar for that long, but what choice did I have, right? There was just one more thing I had to add. I said, just don't touch the neck. The neck of this guitar is my favorite neck I've ever played. It's the reason I bought it. Just please don't touch the neck. He's like, yeah, no problem, kid. We'll just replace the top. So 6 weeks later, they called me. I was thrilled that it was going to be done early, and I answered all excited. He said, all right, so here's what happened. Said, it turns out that because we've since, after you bought this guitar, we replaced our machines, and the body that you have no longer works with the new tops that we're making, so we have to replace the body to put on one of these new tops. I was like, okay, fine, that's fine. Just whatever, replace the top, replace the body. Just please don't touch the neck. He's like, yep, no problem. We're not gonna touch the neck. We're just gonna do the top, and we'll do a new body. I'm like, all right. 3 or 4 weeks later, they called me. It was ready. I hopped in the car instantly, drove all the way out there, walked in. I was like, finally, I'm getting my guitar back. He was all excited. He said, here you go. He brings it over and he opens up the case like a Bond villain displaying a bunch of gold bars in a briefcase. He said, go ahead, sit down, test it out, see how it goes. So I sat down with it, fretted my favorite chord, an A sus2. But before I could even play it once, my heart sank. Something about this neck feels different. See, what happened is once we were doing the top and the body, we realized that the way that we design those now, the machines also don't work with the neck that you had, so we had to replace the neck too. It was like boiling at that point. I said, I begged you. The only thing I cared about was the neck. It was the thing I loved most about the guitar. It was the reason I bought it. You can't have changed the neck. He said, well, we were in the middle of the process and we really had no choice at that point. And then in the midst of my anger, like cartoon steam coming out of my ears, I had this moment of clarity where all my philosophy training kicked in. As most of you know, I have a background in academic philosophy. That's what I did my undergrad in, and that's what I was starting to get my PhD in before I abandoned ship to be a magician and eventually ended up in this crazy career that I have now. And I remember learning about one of these fantastic parables in philosophy, one of these great thought experiments called the Ship of Theseus. And it goes like this. Imagine a ship that takes sail across the ocean for a long, long journey. Well, during that journey, at some point, at least one of the ship's planks, one of the boards, is going to rot and need to be replaced. So when one of the boards rots and you replace it with a new board, the question is the ship still the same ship? Now, most people intuitively say, yes, of course it is. It's had one plank replaced. That's the same ship with a little repair. Okay, fine. Now imagine by halfway through the journey, half of all of the ship's planks have rotted and been replaced one at a time over the course of, whatever, months. I don't know how long ships take to get across oceans. So over the course of time, half of the ship's planks have been replaced. Is it still the same ship? Now, this is a harder question, but most people still intuitively think, yes, this is still the same ship. It's just undergone significant repairs. Okay, now imagine the journey continues, and by the time it docks, by the time it lands on the other side of the ocean and pulls in to port, at this point, every single one of the ship's original planks has rotted and been replaced. Is the ship that finishes the journey the same ship that started it? I'll let you think on that for a second. In the meantime, back to that fateful day. He said, well, we were in the middle of the process and we really had no choice at that point. So suddenly I just burst into laughter. And this guy looks at me and says, what's so funny? I said, you replaced the top, the body, and the neck. You built me a new guitar. And he just looked stunned, his face contorted. He said, yeah, I guess we did. I guess, yeah. I mean, but hey, for what it's worth, though, like that top with that body, with that neck, and the electronics that we had to put into the new body, like if we were to put that guitar in retail, that thing would sell for over over $2,000. It would be one of our nicest, most premium, most expensive guitars. Like that is a much nicer, much more expensive guitar than the one you brought in. That's a hell of a guitar. And truly it was and is a hell of a guitar. The question posed by the Ship of Theseus speaks to our fundamental concerns over identity and change throughout time. If a thing changes over time, as all things do, When can it be said to be a new thing? How much has to change, and how quickly, for a thing to be said to be entirely new and not just an updated or repaired version of an old thing? And what if instead of a thing, we were talking about a person? See, you will change over time. There's no two ways about it. Some of these changes happen naturally, like your cells dying and growing. Other times we have accidents that scar and permanently damage our physical body. Emotionally, we change naturally as a result of aging, but also unintentionally as a response to various stimuli and experiences that we have. And occasionally, if we do things right and we live a good, healthy life, we also change intentionally as a part of self-development. Ask anyone, are you the same person that you were 10 years ago? And they'll say, no, they're a drastically different person than they were 10 years ago. Ask the same person, do you feel like 10 years from now you'll be a drastically different person than you are today? And they'll say, no. I've done a lot of development. I've changed, but I've mostly settled into who I really am. This is who I was always meant to be. And then if you catch up with that person in 10 years and ask them, do you feel like you're the same person you were 10 years ago? They'll give you that original answer again. No, I'm a drastically different person than I was 10 years ago. And this repeats. This has been, studied and shown that it repeats through every age and every stage of life. We have this incredible ability to view who we are now as a very different sort of being as who we used to be, and certainly than who we might someday become. It's scary to consider that who we are now in the present moment is temporary and going to be replaced. I have no illusions that my guitar is the same one I once owned. I miss that guitar terribly. I mourned its death. But I also love my new guitar in its own way for its unique qualities. You are imperfect, and you will always have parts in need of repair, emotionally and physically. Try not to be so afraid of change that you try to stop it. You can't. You will change, one way or another. If the ship of Theseus had never had its rotted planks replaced, it still would have changed. It would have fallen apart and sank into the ocean. Better to make it to shore. Well, thanks so much for stopping by for Thursday Thoughts. This is a function of my podcast as well as the YouTube channel. I try to do the YouTube videos a little bit more conversational and the podcast more as an audiobook or story narration. It's a little bit more intimate and that sort of thing. You can check out the podcast in the description at onenewperson.com. You can always go to humanconnection.blog, which I'll put here on the screen, humanconnection.blog, to join the community of people who are committed to building a better world where everyone feels heard, understood, and valued. I do weekly blogs and emails, bi-weekly podcast episodes during the seasons when the podcast is running. We're at a season break currently as I'm filming this, but we'll be back in March of 2020. Conversations with legends and leaders of industries about chance encounters and relationships and building a sustainable career. Also, if you toss your email in at humanconnection.blog, you will receive a bunch of free resources, including a really terrific resource called 7 Ways to Open a Conversation with Anyone. Everybody finds that super useful. You can implement it today and start building a better network and making better connections. That said, my name is Brian Miller. Thanks so much for sticking with me, and always remember that our world is a shared experience. Have a great day. A sus to